Good day, everyone. I'm Ethan, moderator for this webinar. On behalf of the organizer conference panel, I welcome everyone for today's webinar, HIPAA in 2022 and BAN, being ready for compliance today and in the future. I would now like to introduce our presenter for today, Jim Sheldon Dean. Jim Sheldon Dean is the founder and director of compliance services at Leaf Creek Systems, LLC, a Vermont-based consulting firm founded in 1982, providing information privacy and security regulatory compliance services to a wide variety of healthcare entities. He is a frequent speaker regarding HIPAA. I'd now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody to today's session looking at HIPAA. Our agenda today is to look at the regulatory expectations. What's going on with HIPAA? What's new? What's coming along soon? Anyway, let's look at, what we're talking about today is we're talking about the HIPAA Privacy, Security, and Breach Notification Rules. So let's look and see what's changing in the rules. Okay, let's see what we have for new regulatory directions and proposed changes for the Privacy Rule. Now, the rules have been stable for a long period of time, the last major update. So when we talk about information blocking, we touched on that briefly. Basically, this is a hot topic at Health and Human Services. There's no question about that. We have these new rules been put in place to help make it easier to exchange protected health information. Now, we're also looking at changes to accounting of disclosures. Now, when it comes to 42 CFR Part 2 in HIPAA, HIPAA and 42 CFR Part 2 have always been in conflict, as I mentioned before. Now, security enforcement is another area that you need to be, thinking about these days. When we look at what's happening in the world and what people are being prepared for and working on. The whole idea is you have to be prepared for enforcement activities and auditing activities. Now, when it comes to penalties under HIPAA, the penalty structure is, as I say, is probably due for an update to reflect cost of living adjustments. Now, as I say, some state attorney generals have been busy. Now, some of the settlements may involve Health and Human Services and the states as well. They had a settlement with 28 states for $5 million for a breach. Now, when it comes to security rule enforcement, looking a couple days later in September of 2020, we had another settlement with Premier Blue Cross. Hackers installed a phishing email. Now, we also have in January of 2021, we had the U.S. Court of Appeals vacated the University of Texas fine met best practices standards for providing information security. So you have to be ready for HIPAA audits to resume because the HHS head, the OCR, Office of Civil Rights at Health and Human Services, they has said that the audits may be resumed. They're thinking about getting the audits going again. Now, the audits are, not necessarily a bad thing. The HIPAA audit program. Now, one of the aspects of information security is the whole aspect of using telemedicine. And when it comes to COVID-19, what's happened is HHS has issued an enforcement advisory saying, don't worry about the HIPAA security rule compliance and providing telemedicine during the healthcare emergency. And there's also a similar flexibility provided for vaccination scheduling. There's an enforcement advisory on the vaccination schedule that says you can use a service. There's plenty of HIPAA allowances for communication with family and friends of patients. Now let's look at individual access. We've talked about this a little bit. Let's see what's involved with the individual access. Is it important to manage the access of records properly? Well, yeah, okay. If you look at the regulations, there's only 2 times when you must release information. One is to Health and Human Services if they have questions about compliance. But the other is to the individual if they want to see a copy of their records. That's a required disclosure. There's only 2 of them, okay? Now, information blocking penalties, if you do this wrong, okay, going back to when they actually started tagging these as information blocking penalties in 2019, in 2020 November, we have mental health service providers saying, oh, it's mental health information. We don't have to provide that. If we get into 2021, we have, taking too long to deliver records, 5 to 6 months. That's certainly more than 30 days. We get into March of 2021, we have a slow response, and we have June of 2021 taking 2 years to deliver a minor child's medical record. We get even into 2022, we have a couple situations where they have organization didn't provide access the way they were supposed to, and you get copies for a reasonable cost-based only fee, and that in many cases is a lot lower than what the state allowed fees would be for copies of records. Now, part of what the guidance said was that there was some ability to have people direct their records to go to some other party. Now, when it comes to covered entities and business associates, okay, the business associates are always responsible for carrying out whatever their business associate agreement tells them to do. And they've actually put out a list of what business associates are liable for. They're only liable for these 10 things here, but of course, look at some of these 10 things here. They're huge. Like number 7 is minimum necessary. Now, when it comes to requests for access in the 2016 guidance, when it comes to providing and denying access, it has to be in the form requested if you can readily do that, including electronic format or email. If the patient wants to have you email the copy to them, you should be able to handle that, okay? So access is not authorization, too. Keep that in mind. You know, when you talk about an access request and an authorization, they are not the same thing. They are in completely separate sections of the rules. But when it comes to HIPAA and patient communications, the whole thing is you have to make sure you consider encryption of communications. So what do you want to do when it comes to accessing information? Do what the patient wants to the best of your abilities. Now we're going to touch briefly on accounting of disclosures because it's just going to be briefly because it hasn't changed. So in the accounting of disclosures today, the individual has a right to an accounting of all disclosures of their health information going back 6 years. Now under the HITECH Act in 2009, they had some new rules for EHRs. So the 2013 recommendations they came up with calls for a staged implementation. You know, try it out first with some pilot testing based on real technology we can actually use. Now we'll look at other potential and proposed rules changes here we've got here. So we have a notice of privacy practices. Okay, everybody knows what this is. Now when I'm talking about TCPA, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act of 1991, it limits calls and messages to cell phones without consent. That's one of the things it does. You have to be cautious, especially for anything having to do with billing, because for that you do have to have a express consent for. There's also the concept of requests for restrictions that people have. They're allowed to request restrictions on the use or disclosure of their information. Now also, we'll think about when the emergency is over, as I mentioned earlier. Now we'll look at HIPAA controls and some new technologies. We have new technologies that are in healthcare, you know, every day. I mean, we have these, you know, new devices and new software coming along all the time. Some of it's going to be great. Now, when it comes to security enforcement, you know, obviously we do have issues of portable devices and communications and where the responsibilities lie, and we have these devices now. So when it comes to these health apps, there is some guidance from HHS about using apps that individuals use that are being used at the request of providers. HIPAA can handle new technologies. I mean, this whole thing is, the security rule is very flexible and very adaptable, but you got to use it. Okay, so have you considered the things like the Alexa and the Echo? So you're a to-do list here, okay? Okay, well, thank you very much for listening, everybody. So again, thanks for listening, everybody, and please enjoy the remainder of your day.
Thanks, Jim. So that does conclude the session today. Thank you, everyone, for participating. You may all disconnect now. Have a great day.